the last time we saw Ashton Hall. This dude was a dog for the Akron Zips. He was literally out there defying the laws of physics. And although his team did not get much support early on, Ashton Hall would eventually lead his team to the conference championship, where he absolutely dominated, not only earning himself Conference Player of the Year, but he also led Akron to their first ever college football playoffs, where he ultimately led them to a 1-point victory over Texas A&M. And although Ashton would continue to do well against Oregon, Akron would go on to lose in their next game, putting an end to an incredible year for them and an amazing individual season for Ashton Hall. Which brings us to today, where Ashton has to think about his future, man, because although he likes Akron, that boys was weak. So he has to take a look at the transfer portal to see what teams actually want him, and I'm not gonna lie, man, it did not seem like there were many. Even after an incredible season, Ashton Hall was not getting a lot of love from around the nation. But there was one school that Ashton felt that he not only had a chance to play, but also win a championship. And it was quite literally the only school that would give him that opportunity. So for Ashton Hall, this one was easy. When it came to his sophomore season college decision, he decided to sign with Clemson. Now, when he got to Clemson, the school did not have his number 21, but it was all good because they actually wanted him to wear number 1. Some of the coaches truly felt like he could be their future over the next couple seasons, which is probably why immediately they wanted him to be the starter. And as soon as he got to practice, he was showing exactly why he deserved that spot. And after balling out all day, they would officially make him the number 1 running back for Clemson. Ashton Hall had a plan to get to the NFL, and it was working, mostly because he was sticking to his morning routine. He was doing whatever he had to do to get prepared for his first game of the season. As now that he's with Clemson, they're about ready to head into their first game against top 25 ranked LSU. To start this game off, Ashton Hall is getting stopped in the backfield, so he definitely felt like he was going to have a much tougher season. But on this third down, they hand the ball off to him and he runs through a few people for a first down. Unfortunately, their opening drive of the season would not end in any points as they got stopped on third down. But now down by 3, these Clemson receivers started to make some plays to get them all the way down to the goal line. Where on first and goal, Ashton Hall was able to dive across for his first touchdown of the year. He's already started to make an impact for his new team, and it continued into the second half. Where after coming up with this catch, Ashton is able to bring his team within goal-to-goal territory. And it would only be a play later where they hand the ball off to Ashton, and that ball gets suplexed into the end zone for a touchdown. He's already coming up with his second score of the season for Clemson to help push their lead to 2 possessions. But the way Clemson's offense was clicking all throughout the game, Ashton didn't really have to do too much as they would make their own way across the goal line for another touchdown. And this score on third down and long would actually be enough to put this game away, as Clemson was coming up with a victory in their first game of the year. And it was largely led by Ashton Hall's 110 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. And that was definitely a great game to start his sophomore season, but the coaches wanted to see more. So he accepted the challenge of having a better game the following week, and he prepared for it the best way that he knows how. Because this next game is actually supposed to be an easy one, where Clemson gets to stay at home and face off against one of the worst teams on their schedule, Troy. Now to start this game off, Ashton Hall is actually asserting his dominance. Like, I've never seen that before, but that's crazy. Now Ashton Hall was running wild on their opening possession, even getting his team inside goal-to-goal territory. But unfortunately, his quarterback was throwing a terrible pick that would definitely take some points off the board. But now down by 7, man, Ashton Hall is not having that. He went out there and said, "Hey." See one guy coming towards me, walk right up to him and says, "Excuse me, get off." And all of a sudden, this man Ashton was out of there. This man just put the whole team on his back in one play, and the entire stadium began to fall in love with Ashton Hall. Unfortunately, the next drive would not end nearly in the same way as they got stopped on third down. Now in the second half, Ashton would continue to try to do his job, but by the fourth quarter, they were now down by 10. And the quarterback was out there throwing another interception that was now making this comeback infinitely more difficult. Luckily, though, this Clemson offense had some serious playmakers, and all it took was one catch to this receiver who took it upfield for a touchdown. Nobody was catching this man for a score that was bringing the team back within 1 possession, but by the time they got the ball back, Troy had not only extended their lead, but the quarterback throws his 3rd pick of the game, and his turnovers alone had done enough to give Clemson their first loss of this season. They would fall 26-17 against the worst opponent on their schedule. But it was a game where Ashton Hall did play pretty well, going for over 100 yards, and on top of that, he was gaining a lot of respect from around the nation. He was even able to get an NIL deal signed with Saratoga Water. They were going to give him a bunch of free bottles so he could stay prepared for his morning routine. But at this point, Ashton is looking forward to moving on from the previous loss and hopefully help his team bounce back in another home game against Syracuse. Now to start this game, Ashton realizes that his quarterback has not been following the morning routine, man. This dude has thrown 4 picks in 2 weeks, so on the following drive, Ashton Hall has to save the day. Ashton wasn't about to let his team go outside like they did last week. So after he made this catch, he said, "Hey, block him. What you doing? Get off." And this man was picking up a crazy first down. Unfortunately, this drive would end in 3 points as they got stopped on 3rd and long. And I wish I could say the next drive got better, but the quarterback was throwing his 5th pick in 2 games. This dude was garbage, man, so the coaches realized that they had to rely on Ashton. But eventually, Cade Klubnik would finally stop trying to impersonate Josh Rosen on the Cardinals, as he ends up making a play that actually gives Clemson a 3-point lead. And in the second half, with the help of Ashton Hall, they were able to chew out a lot of this clock and eventually even get up to the goal line where they would score another touchdown, finally doing enough to escape this game, as Clemson closes this game out 17-7, but it turns out that there was some drama behind the scenes. You see, Cade Klubnik was telling the coaches that they think Ashton Hall's morning routine is stupid. It's cringe as hell, and he don't even care that he went for over 140 yards and a touchdown, because ever since the coaches forced Cade and Ashton to be roommates, Cade can barely even get any sleep. Man, he just wishes Ashton would go back to eating watermelon, scrolling through Tinder, and being trash at the game.
Can't keep doing this, bro.
Break it up, bro.
So the coaches decided that they were going to move Ashton down to 3rd string. They didn't want his morning routine interrupting the process of their quarterback no more. So in their next game on the road against Colorado, Ashton Hall was benched. This dude got absolutely no playing time, man. They didn't even have him travel with the team. But after seeing how trash the other running backs have been, the coaches realized that they had to get Ashton back involved or else they'll lose against better teams. So Ashton was out there still doing what he had to do and setting an alarm for 3:50 because the next day he had a chance to move back up the depth chart. And even though he kind of felt like his team had turned their back on him, he still went out there and balled. He wasn't going to let this stop him from making it to the next level. So at this point, he was just looking forward to his next opportunity to play in his next game against SMU, where crazy enough, they are not putting Ashton in until the 2nd quarter, but he was still out there doing his thing. And although they would take him out immediately, they would eventually put him back in on 2nd and goal, where Ashton Hall was plunging his way across for a touchdown to tie this game up for his team. Still though, the coaches decided to take him out and not put him back in until overtime, where on 2nd and 7, Ashton Hall would take this handoff and power his way into the end zone for another touchdown. And it was actually a score that helped his team put this game away. Clemson would close this one out 27-24. And although the team was happy about the win, the fans were still pretty upset that Ashton Hall was not the starting running back, even going so far as to fundraise a billboard just to show support for Ashton. But for the time being, it seemed like the coaches wanted him to remain as a backup, and he would do so going into the next game against Florida State, where once again it was another game where Ashton barely got any opportunities. He did play pretty well when he was in though, and he was actually able to witness one of his teammates go in for a touchdown in the 4th quarter as they take the lead, a score that ultimately did enough to win another game for Clemson. They squeaked out another victory by 3 points. And it was after this game that the coaches realized that they don't know how much longer they can go without one of their best players in the lineup. So the following week, Ashton Hall was finally getting the chance to earn back his starting spot. And after going out there and doing everything that he had been doing over the past couple seasons, it was obvious who the starting running back should be. And Cade Klubnik was just going to have to deal with Ashton Hall's morning routine. But at this point, Ashton knows that he now has a lot of work to do to catch up with the top rushers in the nation. I mean, he's even sitting right behind Trevor Etienne, the brother of the man who is the greatest running back to ever play for Clemson. But now that Ashton Hall has his starting spot back, he's hoping he can make his way towards the same level of success as Travis Etienne. But in order to do that, he's going to have to take care of business in his next game against Boston College. Now finally back as the starter, Ashton Hall was back to making plays that moved the chains for his team. That man was out there saying hey, and breaking off a big run that would put his team inside the red zone, where a couple plays later he was catching the ball on the right side and taking it upfield for a touchdown. His first one since being back as the starter, and he feels like he's going to have many more throughout the rest of the season. Then he actually gets another one later on where he jumps over a guy into the end zone. Probably one of the best plays of his whole career so far, and even Boston College was cheering for him. Unfortunately though, Ashton forgot to stay in the air for 4 minutes, and Boston College was able to use the time to come up with the score. So in the second half, Ashton Hall was trying to come up with some big plays, moving his team well past midfield, but it wasn't his fault that he had big back McGee over here getting called for holding. Clemson though would keep moving down the field. And after Ashton Hall comes up with another catch on the outside, he gets another score on the day. He was putting his team up by 2 possessions, but soon, Boston College was finding a way to tie this game. But now late in the 4th quarter, off the back of Ashton Hall, Clemson was moving their way downfield well into field goal range, and Ashton Hall had got them in a position to put this game away, as Clemson would just barely escape this game 24-21. And it was a game where Ashton Hall had absolutely put the team on his back, going for 196 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. And in a season where his team seemed like they turned their back on him, he was definitely going to take the credit for the wins when he can. And it seemed like a lot of people agreed that he was the reason for their success, as he was drawing a lot of comparisons to another Ashton named Ginty. These are two guys who absolutely terrorized defenses while in college. But Ashton Hall still has a lot of work to do to live up to the legend of Ashton Ginty. So in order to do so, he's going to have another great game in his next one against Duke. Now, early on in this game against an ACC opponent, this Clemson offense was rolling, making it down to the goal line early on, where it did not take long for Ashton to just barely make it over it for a touchdown. A score that would set the tone for them for the rest of the game, as they would eventually get the ball right back. And in a game where it seemed like Duke had no intentions of trying to tackle Ashton, it made it a lot easier for his other teammates when they got their opportunity, as one dude was taking a screen pass and taking it all the way to the crib for a touchdown, extending Clemson's lead to 3 possessions. And if that was not good enough, Clemson was still nowhere near done yet, as in the second half, Ashton Hall was getting across for another touchdown at the goal line, doing more than enough to help his team put this one away, as Clemson goes on to blow out Duke 34-10. And shout out to Ashton Hall for having another great game, going for over 100 yards rushing. Now at this point in the season, Ashton is just continuing to do what he's always done to make himself great. I mean, he's so in tune with his morning routine that he actually decides to take some of it to the field, as he's about to start wearing a long nose strip, maybe even change up his helmet and some other drip too. Because going into the rest of the season, Ashton Hall knows exactly what he has to do to get himself to the league. He's going to have to get to over 1,000 yards on the season and help Clemson get to the college football playoffs. But in order to do that, he's going to have to help his team win their next game against Louisville. In another game that started off with Ashton Hall being somewhat of a goal line merchant, he scored a touchdown early on, but he was not finished. Because later on, after coming up with the catch, he would get some great blocks. And now all he has to do is just run down the sideline and dive into the end zone for a touchdown, already doing enough to win another game for Clemson. As they beat Louisville 27-10, Ashton Hall's stardom continues to grow as he goes for another 100-yard game. He would go on to win his first Conference Player of the Week, but he knew he had more in store for his next game on the road against North Carolina, where even though they were down by 7, Ashton Hall would still bulldoze through the defense for a touchdown, tying this game up. And now the tone was definitely set going into the second half, as Ashton Hall was still out there making some great plays as a receiver, helping to move the team downfield where he said Shabaka and crossed over the goal line for a touchdown. He was having a big performance in the game that was really close, but by the end of it, now tied at 14, it was him who was now closing the game out, as he crossed over the goal line in the final minutes of this game to put this one away. Ashton Hall was an absolute menace on the ground, going for almost 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. But with Clemson now looking at an opportunity to close in on the top 5, all they have to do is just close their season out strong, continuing on the road against Georgia Tech. At this point, it seems like a weekly thing for Ashton to start the game off with a goal line touchdown. And apparently this one gave his team a ton of momentum going forward. Because although Georgia Tech was one of the top-ranked schools in the country, they did not seem that way when playing against Ashton Hall, as he was obliterating defenders on his way across the goal line. This man was absolutely different. And they wouldn't even be out of the first half before Ashton Hall was coming up with another catch, and then jumping over a dude for his 3rd touchdown of the game. Georgia Tech had no idea how to stop Ashton Hall, and he had already done enough to put this game away, as Clemson would go on to dominate Georgia Tech 42-0. And thanks to another great game from Ashton Hall, they are 1 game away from another conference championship appearance. The crazy thing is, though, that despite how well Ashton Hall has played throughout the year, he is still not getting any consideration for the Heisman. But that's all good, man. Ashton Hall doesn't need to win a Heisman. He just needs to be good enough to get to the NFL. But first, he has to help his team close out their regular season on the road against South Carolina. Now, for the first time all season, Ashton Hall had actually fumbled to start this game. And that definitely wasn't a great way to start, but he would make up for it in the second quarter with a touchdown. A nice score that gave his team the lead before South Carolina tied it up, so he had to get back to work. He ran a wheel route up the sideline and ended up making a catch for another touchdown. One of the easiest scores of the season to put his team up in this game. And by the fourth quarter, he was getting across for another touchdown to extend their lead to 2 possessions, and not only do enough to put an end to this game, but put an end to their regular season, as Clemson would close this one out 21-15, and it was actually the first game all year where Ashton was able to go for over 200 yards on the ground, ultimately doing enough to earn Clemson a chance for a rematch against Boston College, where if they win, they'll earn a first-round bye in the college football playoff. So now at this point, Ashton Hall knows that he is 1 step closer to pursuing his dream. But the good news going into this week is that Ashton Hall has already played Boston College, and he had no intentions of letting them ruin his season, so he just treated this game like another daily routine. By 7:43, Ashton Hall was taking his first handoff in this game, and by 7:44, he was saying shabow, throwing a whole grown-ass man off him as he makes his way up the sideline. Ashton Hall had taken his first carry of the game for a touchdown. But that was all good, man. That was just part of the routine. Because by 7:52, they were actually getting the ball back, and Cade Klubnik throws a touchdown. A score that put the team up by 2 possessions. So that by the time 8:05 came around, Ashton Hall could be out there jumping over dudes to pick up some yardage. And although he wanted to stay in the air for 4 minutes, man, he had to make sure that his team scored. But by 8:07, he was taking his handoff across the goal line for a touchdown, extending Clemson's lead even further. And at this point, it seems like Boston College has already given up. Because by the time that it's 9:28, Clemson is up by 31. And another catch and run by Ashton Hall that would get him across the goal line for a touchdown not only does enough to put an end to this game, but punches Clemson's ticket to the college football playoffs, as they shut out Boston College 41-0, and it was largely thanks to a 300-yard performance from Ashton Hall. An absolute dominant game that earns Clemson the title as the ACC champions. But now that it's the end of the season, it is time for the playoffs, but first, there's some awards to be given out. As not only does Ashton Hall win his first National Offensive Player of the Week, but he actually goes on to win Player of the Year. And after having an incredible season with 1,800 yards and 19 touchdowns, it turns out that Ashton Hall actually did enough to win the Heisman Trophy, becoming the first ever Heisman winner for the Clemson Tigers. Ashton Hall was definitely the best running back in college football, as he was awarded so. And he would also go on to win a bunch of other awards, but as great as that was, at this point Ashton Hall is now here for a bigger mission. He knows at this point if he just keeps doing what he's doing, he'll be able to get himself to the NFL. But for now, he also might have a chance to get his team to the national championship. But first, they'll have to take care of business against the best team that they played all year, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now to start this game, the Heisman winner was coming up with some big plays, ultimately getting his team down to the goal line where it did not take long for him to cross over for a score, putting the first points on the board for Clemson as he ties it up in the second quarter. But in a game where Notre Dame's offense was playing well, it's too bad that their defense was too, as Cade Klubnik throws a pick that goes all the way to the crib for a touchdown, extending Notre Dame's lead to 2 possessions. Now, things were definitely not looking good for Ashton Hall towards the end of the third quarter, but with his help, he was able to get his team right back down towards the 1-yard line, where a play later, this man tried to jump and got clobbered into the end zone for a touchdown. That probably hurt, but he was bringing his team back within 1 possession, where on the following drive, he was willing his team back downfield to a 4th and inches. But soon after, Ashton was able to bulldoze over a defender for another score. He was absolutely putting the team on his back in a game that they really needed him. But unfortunately, even though Ashton was playing well, his quarterback was not. And just like he had all season, he was throwing a pick that was probably putting an end to this game. Luckily though, Notre Dame did not score. And with time running out on the clock, Ashton Hall was helping his team get right downfield into field goal range, setting his team up with a chance to put this game away and move on to the next round. Clemson just barely wins this game 24-21, pulling off a comeback led by Ashton Hall, who went for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was by far the most valuable player in the country. It was crazy to think that Clemson actually benched him at some point in the season. It is what it is though, man, and at this point, Ashton Hall is just ready to get into the next game and hopefully help his team get to a championship. After an incredible season, they are now 1 game away from getting to the Natty. And at this point, the only team standing in their way was Penn State. Now to start this game off, Clemson was down by 7. And Ashton Hall did not like that, man. He was out there stiff-arming this dude to the dirt for a first down. He was really out there setting the tone for his team as a receiver would come up with a catch and get across the goal line for a score, tying this game up at 7 in the second quarter, and the momentum seemed to stay in Clemson's favor as they would get the ball right back. And after taking his screen pass, he was able to find a bunch of open space where he read up and said Shablaka, and getting tackled in the end zone for a touchdown. A huge score that gives Clemson the lead going into the second half, where with the help of Ashton Hall, they were on their way towards extending it. This dude Ashton would take a handoff to the left side and say, "Hey, get off me," and power his way across the goal line for another score on the day. He had absolutely broken Penn State's spirit, and it turns out that this touchdown was actually enough to send Clemson to the national championship, as Clemson would win this game 24-7, and led by another 150-plus yard performance, they were on their way back to the Natty. It had been a long season for Ashton Hall, and he had a lot of up and downs throughout his entire journey. He knew that one day he would have a chance to get to a championship, but he almost still can't believe that it's finally here. Led by Ashton Hall, the Clemson Tigers are back, but in order to claim that all-prestigious trophy, they're going to have to take care of business in the final game of the year against the Georgia Bulldogs. Now to start this game off, Ashton Hall was making an impact just how he had all season. Whether it be on the ground or through the air, he was going to come up with some yards to move his team downfield, where it did not take long for Ashton to come up with another catch as he jumped into the end zone for a touchdown. A big score that gave Clemson the lead before Georgia came right back down the field and tied it up. And I guess that might have scared Clemson's O-line or something, because for the first time all season, they were getting called for a false start. But that didn't even seem to matter though, as Ashton was not messing around, bro. He was determined to move his team downfield on every drive. And on this one, he was diving across the goal line for another touchdown, putting his team back up in this game, but it did not take long for Georgia to tie it right up again. But I'm telling you right now, bro, this just seems like a game where Ashton Hall is not taking no for an answer. Every drive, he's either running around you, through you, or just jumping over you, leading his team back to the goal line in the fourth quarter where his quarterback throws a pick. And now all of a sudden things are not looking good for Clemson. It's getting to be late in the fourth quarter, but luckily Georgia does not go on to score, and Clemson gets the ball back. So now on a drive where Clemson has a chance to win it, Ashton Hall is determined to make something happen. So he goes out there ready to make a play before looking over at his quarterback throwing another pick. And all of a sudden, with Georgia damn near already in field goal range, it looks like this game is pretty much over. This was extremely disappointing. And it turns out that after Ashton Hall had an incredible season, he would get one more chance to make a play. Georgia's offense was not able to get nothing going, so Ashton told the quarterback that he better give him the damn ball. And after he does, Ashton Hall is going to work getting his team across midfield. And although Cade Klubnik had been ass all season, on this play all he had to do was just get the ball to Ashton Hall, and Ashton was making a play to get his team in field goal range, putting his team in position to score with no time left and win the national championship. Ashton Hall leads the Clemson Tigers to the top of the college football world. And it's crazy to think that there were parts of the season where this team didn't even want him. In the end, though, he turned out to be the savior as he led them all throughout the season. He had established himself as the #1 player in the country. And not because of him, Clemson was the #1 team. Now, Ashton Hall had an incredible game going for over 200 all-purpose yards, doing enough to finally earn Clemson another national title, where after the incredible season that he had, it seems like Ashton Hall is now the greatest running back in the history of Clemson, as he went on to break Travis Etienne's old record for rushing yards, and it actually turns out that he tied him for the most rushing touchdowns in a season in program history. But now that Ashton Hall is a national champion and widely considered to be the best player in the country, he has some things to think about. I mean, he appreciates Clemson for giving him the opportunity, but they literally benched him earlier in the season. And it was all just because a quarterback who kept throwing picks didn't like his morning routine. And since he knows that he's only going to play one more year of college football, he doesn't really want to spend it at a place that didn't even really want him. So going into the next season, Ashton Hall is definitely going to have some decisions to make. But I'll leave that decision up to you guys. If you want to see Ashton Hall Part 3, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also be sure to comment down below what else you guys want to see next, and YouTube thinks you'll like one of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have a great weekend, happy Easter, and other than that, I'm going to catch you guys next time.